In our last two sessions, we discussed a letter from a woman who had decided to divorce an irresponsible man, Phil, who was also using an illegal drug in their home. I encouraged her to carry out her decision in a loving way, and then she wanted to know how to discuss the divorce with her 8-year-old son, Jason. I suggested that there were two mistakes commonly made by parents as they discuss their divorces around and with their children. The first is that of speaking bitterly and angrily about our partners. The obvious effect of this behavior is that we make our partners look bad and poison a potential source of love for our children. Now, back to the writer of the letter. When we speak negatively about our partners in a divorce, there is another effect that occurs that we don't ordinarily think of. Let me illustrate this with a story. A friend told me one day that she was driving in the car with her 4-year-old when the driver ahead of her, in her opinion, was being extraordinarily stupid and inconveniencing her inexcusably. So she was in the process of shaking her fist at the other driver and giving him a good piece of her mind when she glanced over at her son, buckled in his seat, and she saw that he was shaking, obviously terrified. So she stopped yelling at the other driver, calmed down a bit, and asked her son, "What's wrong?" And what he said was most instructive to all of us. He said, Do you still love me?" Keep in mind that she had directed all her anger and all her words at the other driver. She hadn't been irritated at her son in the slightest. So why was her son wondering whether she loved him? Because her son, without realizing it, functioned perfectly as a love thermometer or sensor. No amount of excuse-making in the world on his mother's part could deny it. No clever words could cover it up. Little children can feel the presence or absence of love. They don't care what words you're speaking, and this little child knew that in the moment his mother was spitting venom like a cobra at this nameless driver, she was being simply unloving and therefore incapable for that moment of loving anybody, including him. And baby, that's the only thing on the planet that kid cared about. He didn't give a flying hoot whether the other driver had just cut his mother off. He didn't care if she was late for soccer practice for another kid or late for an important meeting or anything else. The only thing a 4-year-old cares about is whether his mother is capable of loving him. Why should he care about anything else? And in that moment, she was a raving loon. So he was frightened out of his mind, and she could see it. And that is the other reason we absolutely cannot be speaking angrily about our partners during a divorce. Because the instant I speak angrily about you, if I'm divorcing you, I'm not being loving. And my child feels that. My child senses that my ability to love him while I'm angry just dried up. And that leaves him alone in the world, which is the worst thing I can do to that child. Anything I do that affects the love I can give my child is a disaster of the first order. Not good. Now, in the last session, I said there were two mistakes we make in talking about divorce with children. The first being to talk spitefully or angrily about our spouses during or after a divorce. The second mistake can also be quite harmful, which is never to say anything negative, which is different from being spiteful or angry. And I'll explain that in our next session.